Truffle pig. I can't eat. That's the gist of it. I can't eat. I guess to people who haven't grown up the way I have, it sounds absurd. So much of our lives revolve around eating. Breakfast, lunch, dinner. It's a social ritual and contract, and without it, we lose a core pillar of being human. But I can't eat. I can't be part of that. It's complicated. I grew up to a single mother with a minimum wage. How she managed to keep a sickly kid alive through all that is beyond me. And I don't mean sickly as in getting nasty colds or ear infections. I mean sick with a big S. For as long as I can remember, I could never eat solid food. Some doctors called it inoperable achalasia, but my mom called in royal throat. Just like the kings and queens of old, she used to say. They were so used to having servants feed them that they stopped eating for themselves. It was just a nice way for her to make it sound like I was special rather than cursed. The main problem is that I can't swallow. So instead I'd have to puree my food and slide it down my throat with a thick plastic tube. I can't really taste anything, and the whole ordeal can look uncomfortable to onlookers. So it's something I'm very private about. I can still taste and chew things, but a pleasant taste don't really outweigh the threat of choking to death. I can drink, but it takes some effort. If it gets too hot or cold, my throat just shuts down. Same if it's too sugary, too spicy, or too sweet. And since I can't swallow, I just tilt my head back and let it run down my throat. Mild apple juice is an occasional treat, but I like to stick to ordinary tap water. No fizzy stuff. Nothing that makes the muscles contract. Apart from that one thing, I was a normal kid. I still went trick-or-treating, and by the end of the night, I gave all my candy away to my friends. It made me bully-proof, in a way. To them, I was weird, but it was the kind of weirdness that paid off. Whenever someone handed out candy or fruit or freebies, I passed mine along to those who treated me well. You're like a truffle pig, my buddy Dawson used to say. You get to sniff out all the good stuff, but you can't have any yourself. And that's where the nickname started. Truffle pig. I don't know if it's some kind of myth or urban legend, but it's said that truffle pigs can never be allowed to eat the truffles they're trained to find. If they do, they're useless. They get so preoccupied with finding truffles for themselves that there's nothing left. They get a taste for it, and it's all over. I got the occasional jab and mean look about the nickname, but most of them said it with love. It wasn't mean-spirited. It went from truffle pig to truffles to ruffles to just rough or ruffy. And I guess that name stuck around ever since. I graduated from high school and got a job on a clam boat. Not a fancy job, but I've always loved the sea. I never get seasick or car sick or anything like that. Maybe a side effect from having a strange stomach. So when a spot opened, I was first in line. Did it for a summer as a practice run and got hired full-time a month later. Great pay, decent benefits. We usually worked on smaller vessels. Inshore boats. Smaller yields that could turn a surprising profit at the local seafood markets. Whatever we could get our hands on we could sell at a huge markup. There wasn't a single Christmas where I didn't go home with a bonus. I'd end up being the designated driver whenever I went out with the guys. They'd sometimes forget about my deal and bring me a beer or a scotch, and they'd end up getting an extra one. I'd stare at that bowl of spicy peanuts in the middle of the table and wonder what it'd be like to pig out on them. Stuff my face full and go to town. To feel the crunch in my teeth, resonating in my jaw. But that'd send me straight to the hospital or the morgue. A yellow building just down the street. Truffle pig. Truffle pig. Look, but don't taste. Mom passed when I was 27. It wasn't sudden or dramatic. It was the result of a lengthy battle coming to an end. I held a speech at her wake, divided her possessions among her living relatives. packed all her things in brand new cardboard from the tool shop, picking apart a careful knick-knack ecosystem where everything has a place, leaving only pale walls and dust bunnies. It was kinda funny though. There was this one picture of her and I from when I was just an infant. Back then, I had brown eyes and hair. I thought it was someone else at first, seeing as how I now have my mother's blonde hair with green eyes. But there was a note on the back confirming that it was, in fact, our first picture together. I was offered a few days off work to get my affairs in order, but I declined. Stepping away from your routine underlines how painful the change is. By declining it, you're robbing it of its power. That's what I thought, at least. But when it rains, it pours. And maybe I was distracted that one morning in early May when I turned onto the interstate. I'd gone down that road 1,000 times, but just this once, I didn't pay attention. Maybe the other driver didn't either. Either way, the collision was violent. No one died, at least. They had to cut me out, but the other guy walked away without a scratch. They put me in a neck brace and took me to a hospital. Ran all kinds of tests. I had a fracture in my left leg, but apart from that, it just looked bad. Most of it was surface-level stuff. They still did their due diligence though. X-rays, checkups, the whole shebang. I'd have to wear a cast on my leg, but apart from that I'd be fine. I remember the final day before they sent me home. The doctor, a middle-aged Indian woman, went through my X-rays and talked at length about how lucky I'd been. In between instructions on how to keep my cast clean, I threw in a question. "What about my neck?" I asked. "Am I gonna have to change how I eat?" "No, that should be fine," she said. "Why do you ask?" "The achalasia," I said. "It's inoperable. Should be in my file." "Achalasia?" She looked at me for a couple of seconds, then back up at the X-ray. "You don't have achalasia." I went over it with her again and again. I told her I'd been diagnosed as an infant, that it had stuck with me all my life, that my throat was atrophied, and that I could only have pureed food pushed down my throat with a tube, royal throat, like the kings and queens of old. "I know what you're referring to," she said, "but I don't know what to tell you. You don't have it. From what I can see, you've never had it." She pointed at the X-rays and explained how to recognize it, and that there were no signs of it in any way. I was perfectly fine, I just had to practice eating. "If you've been doing this for so long, chances are you'll never get quite used to it," she admitted. "But physically, there's nothing wrong. But it's gonna take time adjusting to." I walked out of there on crutches, but I barely even paid attention to the leg. I couldn't believe it. All this time, I could have been just like all the others. Someone must have misdiagnosed me, but there was nothing in my file suggesting there'd even been a conversation about achalasia in my past. In those files, I was perfectly healthy. Always had been. I couldn't make sense of it. There had to be a reason I'd lived the way I had. I decided I would go through my mother's things to see if there was a hint. I had boxes to go through a second time. Maybe I'd miss something. I got a ride home from the hospital by my buddy Stevie. 40-something father of 3, salt of the earth kind of guy. The kind of person who has a pickup and doesn't mind helping you move, 'cause that's just what you're supposed to do. He must have noticed I was a bit quieter than usual. "Don't worry about work, Ruffy," he said. "Give it a couple weeks." "Thanks, but that ain't it," I said. "It's my throat." "Whiplash?" he asked. "Got an ache or something?" I explained to him what the doctor had said. That I was fine and always had been. I told him about the X-rays, how nothing showed, and how there was nothing in my files. Stevie got so caught up in the story that he almost missed a green light, making the guy behind us lean on the horn. Stevie snapped out of it and stepped on the gas. "That's effed up," he said, making a left turn. "But I mean, that's good news too." "I suppose, yeah. I was gonna have to get used to a new way of living, one where I could sit by the table and share a meal. I had a hard time wrapping my head around it. I was a bit scared. After all, what if I didn't like it? Could I just go back to pretending? But first, I had to give it a try. I couldn't just go trudging into a restaurant and order a ribeye. I had to try something small. I had Stevie drop me off at the supermarket. I bought some yogurt, cucumber, and chocolate ice cream. I asked him to join me in the kitchen. I figured it'd be for the best to have someone call for help if things went sideways. Like the doctor had said, even if I was physically okay, it'd take time getting used to the sensation. There aren't exactly any tutorials on how to eat. It's supposed to come naturally to us. It's not something you learn. We sat down at my kitchen table, and I cracked open the yogurt. Stevie had a Coke. I didn't have any cutlery, so I had to grab a teaspoon from my mom's kitchen box. I dipped it in the yogurt, picked it up, and observed. My heart was beating out of my chest. "You all right?" Stevie asked. Nervous. "Just try a little," he smiled. "Try to enjoy it." So I tried it. I let my tongue soak in the soft vanilla and acidic tang. I took a deep breath, leaned back, and just tried. I almost choked as my throat muscles cramped up, but it went well enough. It was wildly uncomfortable though. I coughed a little, but held up a hand to show Stevie I was okay. I tried a little more, and then some ice cream. It was difficult, and I could feel an ache in my throat. I was flexing muscles I'd hardly ever used. Over a painstakingly slow hour, I tried little bits and pieces of things. I was getting used to it, slowly but surely. I had to stop when I got to the cucumber though. I cut it up and tried eating it like a mush, but part of the skin got stuck in the back of my throat. I ended up having a coughing fit. Stevie had to give me a couple back slaps. We decided to pause for the day. But it was promising. I was feeling something I hadn't felt before. It was a new experience, and I was getting better at it. "Give it a month," said Stevie. "By the time that leg cast is off, you'll be a brand new person." Over the next few days, I was stuck at home waiting for my leg to heal. Meanwhile, I took some time going through my mom's stuff. Everything from old phone books to photo albums. There were a lot of baby pictures, but they weren't in a particular order. In most of them, I had blonde hair and green eyes, but there were a couple where it was still a clear brown. I could see a couple of things change in my mom too. Her hair getting longer, the marks under her eyes growing deeper. But there were other things too. There was this one picture where she was breastfeeding me, and another shortly after where she used a bottle. There was also one where she'd been in some sort of accident, wearing a bandage that reached up to her shoulder. All the while, I was micro-dosing on food. Little pieces of ice cream and yogurt, mashed potatoes and gravy, a strawberry sorbet. It took some time to get my throat moving, but after just a couple of days I could swallow with little to no problem. The first solid food I ate was a salty peanut. I bit down and chewed it for so long that my jaw ached, and when I finally swallowed, I could feel a tingle in my neck, like little puzzle pieces falling into place. I was so relieved I could cry. I ended up eating a whole bag, letting a rerun of Friends echo in the background. But all I could hear was the sweet crunch of peanuts breaking against my perfect enamel. It was such a filling sensation. Flavor, texture, mouthfeel. And with it all, the realization that I had so much more to experience. It was euphoric. I wanted to save the first time I had a big dinner for a special occasion with my work friends. Not just Stevie, but the whole crew. My cast was still healing, so I had some issue getting around, but that wasn't going to stop me from having a fantastic night. A proper steak dinner, a shrimp cocktail, garlic bread. I didn't hold back. I think my colleagues could feel the change in the air as they all got equally excited to order. We had some drinks, made some jokes, and left all the pretense at the door. Just guys being guys. As soon as I dug into my shrimp cocktail, I could feel something. There was this rush of energy, like an electric surge. I could feel my pupils growing larger, and I couldn't close my eyes. My breathing grew shallow, and my pulse wouldn't stop rising. It's like I was on some kind of drug or fighting for my life. I thought I might be having an allergic reaction, so I had to stop myself and do a mental check. I felt fine. I was fine. Great, actually. The moment my steak arrived, the others raised a glass. To good food, Stevie said. And good friends. The others echoed the sentiment, but before they got to good friends, I'd sunk my teeth into the steak. I could feel the juices soaking into my teeth. It's difficult to describe the sensation. It's like I didn't just eat a steak, I could hear the bovine death cry in the back of my head. I could feel myself growling as a predator, sinking my teeth in like a prowling tiger. I daydreamed with open eyes, watching the red of the meat pulse with an invisible heartbeat. And somewhere in the distance, I could hear Stevie say something, but I couldn't make out the words. I bit down, hard, and tore away. My teeth ached, as if they were pushing themselves out of my mouth, reaching for more meat. And with every passing second, the restaurant faded away until something cold splashed across my face. I was lying on the floor. My work friends were standing in a circle around me. One of the waiters called an ambulance. My hands were covered in grease. I grabbed the steak right off the plate with my bare hands. There were bite marks on my forearm. Deep ones, still bleeding. I had to get my arm stitched up. According to Stevie, I'd gone completely feral. I'd torn that steak up, reached across to Luke's pork chop, and grabbed that too. When I couldn't immediately grab more meat, I'd fallen to the floor, biting my own arm like I was trying to subdue a prey animal. They'd never seen anything like it. Some kind of episode, Stevie said. We're worried about you. Doctors didn't know what to make of it. Some kind of chemical imbalance from a sudden shift in diet, combined with stress and physical recovery. It didn't help that I'd been drinking. Not much, mind you, but enough for it to affect me. They couldn't point to a single instigating factor and instead prescribed me a kind of anti-anxiety medication. They were just throwing darts at the wall at that point. Coming home, I noticed something peculiar. There was a crack in the side of my cast. I'd just been at the hospital, and it had been fine, so it must have happened recently. I thought about going back there, but I flexed my leg a little, and it felt fine. And in a couple of minutes, the whole cast peeled off. My leg was healed. Now, I'm no doctor, but I couldn't feel anything wrong with it. I could put pressure on it. Flex my foot. Not even a hint of pain. The only thing I could point out as being unusual was a strange skin growth on the left side of my thigh. At first I thought it was a long strand of hair, but it was too thick and covered in skin. Touching it didn't hurt, so I just broke it off and held it up. I got a little spot of blood from it, but nothing major. The thing was moving when I held it up, contracting over and over like a dying insect, or like the leg of a shrimp. I got a call from my boss the following morning. They insisted I took some time off in accordance with my doctor. They were eager to have me back, but I had clearly not adapted to my new circumstances. It was a very diplomatic way of saying I was making people uncomfortable, and that they needed some time before they could forget that mental image of me gnawing on myself like a wild animal. But that just gave me more time to experience things on my own. I made a long list of things I was going to eat. Pork, chicken, turkey, maybe something a bit more unusual like alligator, at least 3 kinds of fish, crab, and every kind of fruit I could find at the supermarket. Then again, fruit didn't excite me as much. There was just something about biting into meat that was way more satisfying. I enjoyed the taste of fruit and veggies, but there was something about the texture of meat that I couldn't make sense of. Then again, this was my first time experiencing food. There was no way for me to know this wasn't normal. When I got back from my shopping spree, I went to the bathroom to wash my hands. I noticed something in the bathroom mirror. My eyes looked different. The pupil looked rectangular. I figured it was a trick of the light, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was about to change. But I was too excited to care. I was gonna have a field day. So I washed my hands, splashed some water on my face, and hurried into the kitchen. At first, I was systematic, putting out little samples of things. Bite-sized nuggets of meat, ready to be plopped down in a single gulp. I prepped a couple in the frying pan, others in the oven. I'd bought a new air fryer to try out some combos. I put on some music and had a blast. Everything was so rich, so succulent. Different textures, different flavors, and a world to discover. I could imagine the salty sea running between my fingers as I bit down on the crab meat. I could feel the texture of the feathers as I slurped up a slice of turkey. I adored it. Every last second of it. I spent close to 13 hours that way. Just eating, eating, eating. The shops closed and opened, and I was first in line to get more. I must have looked like hell. That's what the look on the cashier's face said, at least. I would fall asleep at the dinner table, still holding my next piece of meat. A chicken wing. A tomahawk steak. An honest-to-God cheeseburger. I'd close my eyes and keep eating, dozing off between bites. It was heaven. While I didn't know it at the time, I kept that up for 49 hours total. I was in this meat-stained daze, not knowing what was happening around me. I'd missed calls and appointments, emails, bills to pay. I hadn't paid attention to any of it, and my systematic approach had completely fallen out the window. It was a marathon. When my kitchen ran empty, I lumbered to the bathroom. My stomach felt like wearing a backpack on the front, like an imbalance. I had to lean my arms against the wall to keep myself from tipping forward. I was scared to look in the bathroom mirror, but I did it anyway. The pupils of my eyes had gone horizontal. The skin of my left leg had hardened into a kind of shell. My teeth had grown long and jagged. My nails curled into claws. And throughout my hair I could find these long hollow tubes, like the growing feathers of a baby bird. My tongue was thick and discolored. My skin turning a reddish brown, with white milk-like spots. I just stared at myself, not grasping that this was a mirror. It showed me, but I wasn't me anymore. And when that realization hit, two thoughts struck me at once. One, that I was destroying myself. That this whole ordeal was what my mother had tried to avoid. Two, that I didn't want to stop. I needed to keep going. I went through my mother's things in between meals. It is hard to piece together a life after it's gone, but it's even harder when you think you already know what it looks like. But my mother's life was very different from what I imagined. Sure, my father was a mystery. There was no mention of him anywhere, except that they met at a punk concert back in the 90s. But she'd lived a very full life since then. She'd had friends, lovers, and plans of her own. But one thing stood out in particular: how I'd lost my brown hair and eyes. From what I could tell, she'd hurt herself in some way, and after that I'd changed. It was around the time where I'd gone from breastfeeding to being bottle-fed. The thought hit me. An uncomfortable one. I thought back on what I'd done with that steak and the way I'd torn into it. Could I have done something similar to my mother? Had I always been like this? I tried to find more. More answers, more pictures, more anything. All the while, I ate. When I ran out of meat, I had the fruit. When I ran out of fruit, I had the veggies. Then the butter. The yogurt. The ice cubes in the back of the freezer. At one point, It was 3 in the morning, and I was feverishly going through a photo album from my high school years. Nothing interesting, but I realized I didn't have anything left to eat. And yet, I was still chewing. Looking down, I had started pulling out the buttons from the remote control and crunched them up like they were little plastic cashews. I didn't care. I just had to eat. I gnawed on anything and everything. The leg of the kitchen table. The copper wire going to my bedside lamp. I smashed a wine glass on my cutting board and ground it up into something resembling salt and ate that too. I didn't feel a thing. It was just more texture. Wonderful, filling texture. I was in a daze. And the next time I looked myself in the mirror, I could barely comprehend it. When change happens rapidly and naturally, it is hard to notice. You don't really see it until you slow down long enough to care. If you've been running a marathon, you don't stop halfway through to weigh yourself. You wait until you're done. It was the same for me. I didn't realize the changes until I'd slowed down long enough to reflect on them. I wasn't human anymore. My hands had turned into this amalgamation of hoof and claw. My back was bent over with a fish-like ridge running along my spine. My eyes had 3 different colors, and one of them were coming out of the socket. If I concentrated, I could move it in and out, like the eye stalk of a crab. A couple of my teeth had turned to glass and ceramic. I could spot copper cables running under parts of my right bicep. Anything and everything I consumed with gusto had integrated into me, one way or another. I couldn't call for help. My fingerprint didn't register on my phone log. I couldn't make words in my mouth to speak. I'd turned into a flesh prison. You are what you eat. I'd lose track of time. One day I'd have a tail dragging after me, another I'd have a wing instead of an arm. My whole body was bubbling, like a boiling cauldron, shifting with every bite. But with nothing left to eat, it was devouring itself, eating the last parts of me that were human. I'd awakened a process that couldn't be stopped, and it would turn on itself instead of letting me starve. There was no one to call for help. I could barely close the blinds to my windows. I spent most of the time in the shower, drinking water straight from a busted pipe. I'd spend hours there, drinking, watching myself mutate. I could even affect it, in a way. Another finger, I'd think. And there'd be another finger. But it was getting harder to think, to comprehend, to put thoughts together in a way that made sense. Perhaps more things changed than I realized. After all, the brain is as much an organ as the heart, the throat, and the tongue. I'd lose long periods of time to a hazy blur. I remember snatching a bird off the windowsill and eating it whole, like popping a grape. I'd walk around gnawing on the curtains like they were long strands of spaghetti. But in a way, I knew I was losing myself. Whenever I had a moment of clarity, I could feel my heart sink into that empty pit in my stomach. I'm going away, I'd think. I'm losing myself. So with every fiber of my being, I grabbed a piece of paper, bit my finger, and wrote in blood. Stay human. It's difficult to describe the mind of an animal. A part of you disappears. You don't think about inconvenience or what ifs. You think about your next meal, where to sleep, and where to get water. You don't care if you knock over a lamp or pull out a cable. It's just noise. I remember watching that paper, knowing it said something. But the symbols didn't mean anything. It turned from words to scribbles. At one point, I mistook them for droppings and started to look for mice. Didn't find any. I didn't consider myself lost. I didn't consider anything. And for days, I lumbered back and forth, turning my home into a nest. Then, at some point, the symbols made sense. A rare moment of clarity. Stay human. I knew it was temporary. A matter of minutes, maybe an hour. I had to think of a plan. Something, anything, that would make me stay human. Everything pointed to me taking on the properties of what I ate. So, if I wanted to make myself human, there was only one solution. One grotesque, unthinkable solution. Now, I could find something tasteful in everything I ate. Anything from glass, to copper, to wood and bone. But having to eat human meat to find myself, that was a line too far. But what choice did I have? I made a plan. It was a long shot, but it was the only one I could think of. I could feel myself slipping, so I tried to remember 3 things. The color of the building I had to go to, the direction I had to move, and that there was meat there. Color, direction, meat. I repeated it like a mantra. I remember standing by the front door, pressing my head against the wood. I could hear someone taking their sweet time to lock up and leave in the hallway outside. "Please, just go," I prayed. "You have to go." By the time they were gone, so was my mind. All that remained was color, direction, and meat. I made it outside. I followed the direction, looking for the color. A yellow building, just down the street. I would run through the dense woods on all 4s, thundering like a hoofed gorilla. I could feel my body changing to sustain the momentum, my arms growing heavy. I had to force myself to keep going, to stay focused on the task at hand. There were so many distractions. Cars in the distance. Voices. Bright lights casting shadows of potential prey. But I followed the direction in my mind, and I saw the building with the color. And I knew there'd be meat. I didn't even notice the locked door. I walked straight through like it was made of paper. There was no guard there, thankfully. If I'd had the mind to read, I would have noticed the sign of County Morgue. I would know what the smell from the metal boxes meant. But in the mind of an animal, you don't care about the name of your prey. You don't give meaning to your actions. You just take what you want and make it your own. So that's what I did. I'm not gonna go into detail. I can't. I remember every bite, but I can't bring myself to put it into words. A man who died from a heart attack. An older woman who'd broken her neck. I pulled them out and did what animals do. Meat, bone, organ. Later, the papers would say it was a bear. They weren't entirely wrong, I suppose. I lumbered home, dragging my bloated stomach through the woods. I'd feel my senses returning to me. A mind becoming human. But with that realization came understanding in what I'd done, and the searing emotional pain that ensued. I lay there among the berry bushes and the blue sunflowers outside my apartment complex, hoping no one would see me, as I waited for an opportunity to go home. But honestly, at that moment, I think I rather would have died. So here we are, back at the start. I can't eat. My hair has grown out into a mix of black and gray, a combination of the 2 people missing from the morgue. My face still looks like my own. I guess that part was still buried somewhere deep in me. I'm a little taller and a little heavier, but my colleagues have chalked that up to a change in diet. I've gone back to an all-puree lifestyle. That same old bottle pushing straight into my gut. I can't allow myself to be lost to sensation again. I treat myself to some fruit every now and then, and the occasional drink, but I don't eat full meals. I don't want to tempt fate any more than I already have. I'm back at my job, and I think I'm doing all right. People are looking at me like they always have. No one questions that I've gone back to what works for me. They could see for themselves that something didn't sit quite right when I started eating. They didn't want to see that roughie again, and that's fine with me. Of course I want to know more, but the only person who could tell me for sure has passed on. There are no more leads, no more signs. The only thing I could find was a curiosity among my mom's old letters. I'd missed it once because it was stuck in her collection of birthday cards, but there was a handwritten note from an anonymous sender. I told you not to breastfeed him. No name, no signature. Just messy handwriting on a crumbled up piece of yellow paper. All in all, life goes on. I know I'll never really be like everyone else, but I think that's okay. I can pretend for as long as I need to. Maybe it's okay to be a tainted truffle pig as long as I don't go looking for something to eat. But if I'm honest, sometimes I wonder, if I gave in, fully, and let myself run loose, if I consumed anything and everything, what would that make me? If I put it all into a single package, what would I become? Truffle pig. Truffle pig. Look, but don't taste. I hope you guys liked this video. If you did, make sure like, comment, share, and subscribe the channel Mark Stories.